All right, so this is the JBL Masterclass number 4. How many of you guys have been to one of these before? Oh, damn, nice. That guy has. Yeah, well, we're super excited to have Vincent here for our 4th Masterclass, so hopefully you guys learned some stuff. It's gonna be an hour of Vincent talking to you guys about his production process, career, creative flow, things like that. And then there'll be a half-hour Q&A, and then a meet and greet at the end. So take it away.
All right, what's up, guys? I'm still shocked so many of you guys showed up. This is crazy. I go by Vincent as alias, but my real name is Rob. It's kind of a letdown, but at least you guys know from the start. I'm just gonna record this so that we're all good. All right. Yeah. Just gonna go over a whole bunch of stuff. We're gonna try to get into everything and let you guys know about like everything from when I started, even figuring out music or how I got into music the first way, and then go through finding your sound and trying to learn production, and then going through releasing music, how to get your music heard, how I got my music heard, ways in which you can do that. Then go through touring, and then a bunch of, like, I wrote extra thoughts, but it's more so just like things that, ideologies that I try to live by that maybe you guys will like, maybe you guys won't like, maybe they don't make sense, or maybe you live by them after you hear them, maybe you already know them. Who knows? We'll just run through it, and hopefully you guys can learn something from any of this. So how I got started in music was my mom was really, really heavy on me playing piano from like the age of 4, I'm pretty sure, when I got put into music classes. And as I started doing them, they were really fun. And obviously, like, I had a local teacher because I'm from Winnipeg in Canada. You guys know where Canada is? You guys know where Winnipeg is? Does anybody know where Winnipeg is? Who said that? Oh, hi, thank you, Tori. Yeah, Winnipeg is, it's kind of like this small area. I think the city's got like 1 million people, and I lived outside of the city. Like, my parents, we were outside of the city, and it was kind of interesting trying to get into electronic music because my parents didn't really like have that much of a music background. Like, my mom wanted me to go into piano, and she literally forced me into piano. There was a point after doing it for 5 or 6 years, it was probably 10 or 11, and my brother and I were both in similar classes, and my dad was like, why are you still forcing them to do this if they don't want to do this? And we were like, no, we hate practicing. We hate being regimented and continuously doing it. And obviously, I thank her now, and my dad as well, for making us go through that. But I hated it when I went through it because the practice schedule was 45 minutes, 5 times a week, every week, and it never stopped. Like, there was no break. And just consistently doing those and like leading up into going to recitals with all the other kids that my teacher taught, which were obviously, looking back on it, fantastic. But at the time, you're like 10 years old, you're just worried about hanging out with your friends or playing video games or anything else related to life. So it kind of sucked. But after I realized now that it helped so much, I would have never changed anything. Yeah, so same thing in discovering electronic music in the festivals. I really took a liking to playing piano, but going through and playing like a sonata or any other type of the classical stuff, or even before I started getting into jazz piano, I would consistently play what was on the sheet. And I never understood that, there's probably a person behind all this music. Somebody wrote this. And so eventually, on just like happy accidents, I would play like the wrong note in the middle of, a Bach piece or something, and it sounded cool. It wasn't right, but it sounded great. And I was like, oh, well, I'm just gonna keep playing that because that sounds really cool. And then I would go to the lesson the next week, and my teacher would be like, oh, well, you keep playing the wrong note. You have to stop doing that. And I'm telling her, well, no, this sounds really cool. Like, let me play this. And she's like, well, that's not what's on the sheet. You have to play what's on the sheet. And eventually, year or two after that, and continuously going through, I was realizing that, oh, well, somebody wrote this, and it sounds cool, and that's the way it's supposed to be played. But if I play it this way, it sounds better to me, and I like that. So maybe I can write something similar, or just music in general, on the piano, just as simple as playing around and playing whatever I felt like. And that was kind of when I realized, oh, like, it's not just the people that lay out music for you that are the only ones that can do music. It's not like after Bach, there was nobody else and music just kind of stopped. And then, realizing that music's on the radio, listening to whatever I could, started realizing that, oh, well, maybe I can make music. And it was kind of just the simple ideology that, anybody can do it, so why can't I do it as well? And then going back to the Winnipeg thing as well, it was very difficult trying to find other people that were into electronic music. I think the earliest thing that I can remember listening to, like from finding my own music taste other than from video games, like I used to play a lot of SSX on tour, which is just had a really, really good soundtrack for me. And I, even to this day, whenever I go skiing or snowboarding, I like literally have a playlist on my Spotify that is just the songs from that game. So I'll like rotate it and keep headphones in while I'm there so that I can feel like if I'm not skiing without it, it doesn't feel like I'm skiing, or it doesn't feel like it's real. Like I have to have the music to accompany it to be like, oh yeah, this is the same feeling that I used to have. But electronic music, at least in my like little sheltered version of life, was not present. Like there was no electronic music. It was just kind of like my dad listened, I'm gonna end up roasting my dad, but he listened to the same like 50 to 60 songs all of my childhood. And like, I ended up liking a bunch of Shania Twain at one point too when I was like 8, and that was one of my favorite songs. Can't remember which, but they had their music, but they would never really incorporate it. It was more just like, oh, the music that you know is what you're playing on the piano, and that's it. So eventually, as I started playing video games, if you guys can remember what LimeWire is, either that or it shows my age, and downloading the same, what was it, every third download you'd get that speech. I can't remember who it's from. I don't know anything about, or not much about American history, but there's definitely like every third file would be corrupt, or you'd have to go through something else. But I just started like digging into music myself. I remember in 8th grade, I was listening to Dr. Dre's The Chronic 2001. I believe that's the album. And I just listened to that on repeat while my friends are listening to God knows what else. Like I don't even know what they were listening to at the time. But through that, I just started finding my own niche version of like, oh, this sounds really cool, I'm gonna keep listening to it. Or, oh, this sounds really cool, and my friend showed me, but I don't really like it, but at least I've got like a little bit of introduction to music, because everything that was on the radio, even today still, like I don't know if it's like Canadian thing to still play Carly Rae Jepsen's Call Me Maybe, but they still do. Like probably once a day, unironically. Not that the song's bad, I love the song, it's great, and you can't, I don't think, I would never deny that, but it's very much of like a little bit behind. I remember the first time that I came to LA, they were playing like was it Back to Back Freestyle by Drake? They were playing it like the day after it came out on the radio, and that would never happen where I'm from. They wouldn't, that song would never reach radio, ever. Like I never heard that on the radio, that wasn't a thing. But eventually, in this giant weird way of finding music through like YouTube videos where I found The Funeral by Band of Horses or Walking on a Dream by Empire of the Sun, I would just start finding these songs from random places. I'm like, oh, this is really, really cool. I'm gonna remember this, keep listening to it. And then eventually that led to finding an Ultra live stream in 2012, I think it was 2013. And I started watching it and I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like I love electronic music. Dove into Skrillex, dove into all these other artists, and realized through watching these festivals consistently, like Coachella or Ultra, or I don't think Tomorrowland or Tomorrow World were streamed, but as I was watching those, I'm like, wow, these festivals have thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people going nuts to all this music that I listen to in my spare time. And none of my friends listen to this stuff, but people from all around the world travel to these festivals to listen to this type of music. So there's got to be a market for it. Like somebody's listening. And even though it was, maybe in the US, because I wasn't there yet, maybe it was fairly popular for you guys growing up. I'm not entirely sure. But for back home, it was not a thing. Like just people didn't really know electronic music the same way that I felt the rest of the world did. And so after that, it kind of just, I'm going to end up skipping a point, but that's how I got into producing. Because I was like, there's tons of money in this somewhere. Like nobody just puts up these giant festivals without money. It's not like you know your friends got a bunch of speakers, and your other friends got CDJs, whatever those are, because I don't know what those are at the time. And then this other dude standing here and like waving his hand or saying something on the mic while 60,000 people jump and scream. Like, it doesn't just get set up over a weekend. Somebody's setting this stuff up. Somebody's got to do it. So eventually I started diving into producing. A friend of mine had a copy of FL Studio and was like, hey, you should try this. Like, I'm learning how to produce. This is kind of cool. And he was kind of like on and off about it. And so I went over to his house once and tried it. And it was cool. Like, I get it. Yeah, this is how you get your ideas into a program to make music. And it was kind of just the understanding that that's possible. I didn't really like FL Studio, disclaimer. But still really cool that you can like, oh wow, this is the first time at 13, like, these ideas are possible on a computer. You just have to figure out how to get them in there. And after I figured that out, was like, this is a giant explosion. Like, okay, everything I'm seeing at these festivals is made by people that make whatever they want, tying into how I realized playing the wrong notes in a sonata or whatever ended up also culminating together to be like, wow, you can make music. Electronic music is a real thing. There is some sort of demand for it, even before it started becoming a big thing. I'm just gonna do it and like try to figure it out while I'm in like 10th grade. And just kind of like, let's just do it. And I just remember producing all the way through high school and like showing friends ideas and stuff. And they're like, I don't get it. And I was like, okay, cool, well, whatever. I'm just gonna keep doing this anyways because I love it. Tying that into learning to DJ on software, I ended up learning how to DJ on Virtual DJ because I didn't really know that there were controllers or things that you could buy to DJ on. I'd seen, you see like Avicii or Skrillex or whoever, they're playing these giant festivals. They've got something, but I don't know what it is. And I remember eventually after I figured out like, oh, you can make music, and then the way that they play it is by DJing it, and then there's an art to DJing just as much as there's art in creative space for producing. All of that coming together is like, okay, now we get it. I understand how to do it. There's so much room for it to be done because it's so new to me as like a 14, 15-year-old kid. I'm like, okay, well, let's just try and figure everything out at the same time and learn it. Eventually, like these two pictures are really, really old. The top one was a panorama. I think the first time that iPhones let you do panoramas. And I didn't even use the vinyl or the CDJs at the time. I just like admired CDJs because they look cool, and that's what Skrillex used. So that was like the big thing for me. But I remember buying an S2 from a friend that sold it to me for like 150 bucks. And then I would start playing gigs from friends and friends of friends. Like one of my friends went to university in Manitoba. Like I also went, but there's two separate ones. There's like a really, really big one, and then there's a smaller one. And one, he was walking around school, he found a flyer for like an electronic night, and he sent it to me. I just texted the picture and was like, hey, you should somehow connect with these guys. This would be really cool because I know that you're doing your thing. Maybe you can connect with them and make it like an actual thing. Maybe you can play a set. Maybe you just talk to them and understand what they're going through because somebody else in the city likes electronic music, which at the time for a sheltered 16-year-old is like, no, nobody's doing electronic music. I just sit in my room for 8 hours a day after school and just try to produce between working and going to school. Which, I mean, it kind of loads into the second picture too. The second picture was the first festival gig that I ever got, but it was like a smaller room for people to play in. It's called Scream, where they had, I can't even remember who played it. There were some like fairly big artists that came through, but Winnipeg shows were like few and far in between. Like not every tour goes to Winnipeg, just because it's like not every tour goes to Iowa City or just other places. Like obviously most tours hit Los Angeles, San Francisco. They'll go to somewhere in Florida, somewhere in Texas, New York. But if it's not a major city, you don't see it. And in Canada, I feel like it's even more concentrated. Where if you live outside of Winnipeg or if you live in Nunavut, you're not really gonna, show of hands, how many people even know what Nunavut is? Okay, Mark's Canadian, so I know that. But yeah, it's just like, and you had it as well, but it's just like, people don't go to off cities. So I remember at the Top Club as well, before it got shut down and turned into a restaurant, I got to see R.L. Grime play there before he put out Tell Me, which is his collab with What's So Not. And it was back when ID culture, at least for myself, was a huge thing. And I remember watching videos of him playing it live in other venues in other cities. Wow, this is so cool. Got to see him actually play it before it came out and lost my mind. It was awesome. But in somehow tying this back, I'm sorry, I'm going to do this quite a bit. I go on tangents and then remember what I was talking about before and then connect it back. It's really bad, but hopefully I'll minimize that. With the guy that showed me the flyer, that was also the same guy that showed me FL Studio a couple of years beforehand. And I ended up having to go to like an audition and meet the guys that made the poster that were holding the night. And they kind of, like, it wasn't really an audition. I thought I had to go DJ in front of them and show them my skills, but we just ended up talking for like 45 minutes. And they're like, yeah, cool, you can play. I'm like, all right, cool. So we played this night that they had set up. It was just it was like a biker bar and the downstairs of a hotel, and I invited like 6 or 7 friends at 10:30 to watch me play for an hour, and it was kind of like this, except there were only 7 of them, and if I was DJing here, they just kind of pulled chairs up in a giant semicircle and just watched, and I just kind of like, you know, I'm like bobbing my head out, like I love what I do, and then I'm looking at my friends, and they're like, they're just here to support me, they don't care, but they like, and then, you know, eventually they would come up because they're the only people sitting there too. They'd like shake my hand, hug me, and be like, yeah, I gotta go. I'm like, okay, cool. So everybody had left by, you know, 20 minutes left in my set. And then we did that a couple times. Then it developed into a friend of mine from back home named Jaden, who also helped me get the Top Picture gig, which I was opening for, I believe it was Grand Theft. And then also helped me with the Bottom Picture, which was playing Scream, which was like an opening slot on the main stage at a old Wheelies, which is like a roller skating arena that they turned into a rave, which was really, really fun. But it also taught me, like looking back on it, that I was in a local scene that I didn't even think happened. I kind of just blocked that out of my mind when I moved. Like, oh yeah, that never happened. I never talked with anybody that I worked with back at home, or I never played sets at home. And obviously, like digging back for these pictures, you realize that, yeah, no, you actually did work around, you talked to people, you had to try to figure out a way to realize if this was a real thing or not, just electronic music in general, never mind playing sets or getting your music out there. But it definitely helped a lot in terms of like practicing and getting you're used to DJing and, you know, getting your name out there just by talking to people, or by like, you know, word of mouth from other people sending you flyers and then investigating it, or just doing something to at least keep yourself learning or adventuring, even if it's in your own city and you're sheltered and you believe like none of this really exists in my city. Producing and releasing music. So like I said, I started on FL Studio, and then I spent maybe like a week there, moved into Reason, and I went on Reason for 3 years. And I could never get my master to sound loud. It was always coming out at like -6. And not knowing anything really, I was like, oh, well, the DAW's the problem. Like, it's not me, it's the program. And then I was like, okay, well, I'll learn Ableton. Spent 3 weeks on Ableton and put out my first song. Like, it was that quick. My mind just like worked with Ableton, and I could start to understand that if you have the idea, you can create it and get it into software, as opposed to Reason was like, okay, well, that sounds cool. Like, we'll just use that and work on something else afterwards. But it was when I switched to Ableton that complemented my way of thinking, that helped me get out and start producing better stuff. Producing with friends or watching others really helped understand other things that I could never figure out. Like, a lot of the music tips, or just in producing things that I thought were difficult, became so simple when I saw somebody else do it. Like between reverb automation, which I just figured out, you know, a month or half a year ago type thing. Like all these little tiny tricks that you're like, oh, how does somebody do that? A lot of friends or a lot of peers like that you might work with on a collab, or just sit in their room and like work with them, a lot of those things will just come out. I lived in a studio house with a friend that I thought and still believe is like one of my favorite producers that doesn't even do EDM anymore. And I sat and watched him work for about a week in this studio house that I slept in North Hollywood somewhere. And just watching him work, like I was like, oh my God, that's how you get that sound, or that's how you do this, and that's how you create something that I've been trying to figure out but would never be able to type into Google or YouTube. And that's the sound that I need to figure out. I think like I remember watching Wiz Khalifa come up off of Twitter and being like, you know, he just dominated Twitter when he was first coming up, or at least that's what I saw before Twitter was even popular for anybody in Winnipeg. At least I still don't know that many friends that use Twitter. They always use Facebook or Instagram. But I realized that like, okay, Wiz Khalifa is using Twitter and he's using it like really, really well. He's getting good engagement and it's helping his career grow because he's just constantly doing something with it and people resonate with it. And I knew that Twitter wasn't going to be my main platform, but I started realizing, well, maybe something else. Maybe it'd be AudioMac, maybe it'd be SoundCloud, maybe it's MySpace, which it definitely wasn't MySpace. It was SoundCloud. And I just started investigating, like over the years of putting out music and just throwing it up on SoundCloud, seeing what would happen. Eventually plays started happening without any type of push. There's like no blogs at the start. There was nothing really big. It was just me getting my music out there to the internet. And eventually, as I started working on it more, I started realizing that the charts, which I feel like a lot of people don't know exist on SoundCloud, there's like a new and hot chart and there's a top 50. And as I started working with those more, I started learning how to manipulate them a little bit in my favor so that it would help the song stay on these charts more. And if it was on the charts longer, the longer it stayed, or the more plays it got, the longer it stayed. And the longer it stayed, the more people had a chance to hear it. And then once it fell off the charts, there, you know, the residual plays just stopped happening, but it gave all of the songs more of a shot at the end of the day. If you guys haven't looked into it, definitely go try to find the charts on SoundCloud. Like it's kind of an interesting thing. Like the top 50 will have like the top 50 songs that are being played consistently forever. And it's just really, really cool to look into. But as I was learning about that and trying to figure out how to manipulate them or how to get my songs to stay on the new and hot or how to go from the new and hot to the top 50 chart of each genre, that was a big thing for me to figure out. And I think that maybe if SoundCloud's not the biggest platform anymore and it might be Spotify, there might be different ways, the same way that were possible with SoundCloud to find out through Spotify. Like I feel like there's always a loophole that you can find if you dig hard enough or you talk to people the same way as production. You can talk about branding or music or just general platforms. And from that you can find, you know, little things to help each other out, whether it's like it could be as simple as, oh, let's do a track together and, you know, we'll both share fan bases and grow, or, you know, sharing a tiny little secret between production or through a platform or through something else that will also help you figure out something that you wouldn't have known alone. That kind of ties into the staying on the curve of what's next. I didn't mean like, oh yeah, we're all making mid-tempo now, but no offense to anything mid-tempo. I love mid-tempo. That was really savage. I'm sorry. Mid-tempo's great. I made a mid-tempo track. I remixed Oral Grime and it's mid-tempo. So there's nothing wrong with any genre. I just meant more of staying on the curve of like, if you think SoundCloud isn't as popular as good, what can you do in a different platform? Or maybe do you ride or die SoundCloud? Maybe you switch to Spotify. Maybe Spotify's gone in the next hour and we don't know. And then it's move on to Apple Music. There's different avenues that we can all explore, but it's about finding the one that you think will help you the most and diving into it. At least that's how I see it. Learning how to use social media in your own way is a big thing as well. I feel like there's a lot of people that have their own brands on social media, like certain people use social media differently. I feel like Fisher's a great example because you could just, you know, wave your hand. That dude's a legend. I love that guy so much. But finding a way to do it in your own way and in an honest way, at least that's the way I try to do it, is what I think will bring people together or back to your music. Because if you're just going on your Twitter all the time and posting like, oh yeah, new song, or like, oh this, oh that, oh whatever. Or you have like Luca Lesh who posts lots of funny tweets. That's his brand and that's how I would relate him on Twitter. If somebody asks, what's Luca like? Or like, what's Sean like? That's how I would see him if I was asked how he was on Twitter or what is his persona. So finding yourself, and you can create a character the same way that Fisher has done. Actually, I've never met him, so maybe that's just how he is, and that's even better. But finding your own way to be honest or be yourself, I think is better than trying to, like, you know, just do the same, like, oh, here's tickets, here's this, here's that. Eventually it gets monotonous and people like tune out to it, even if the music's great. Or at least that's what I do. I just, eventually it gets boring. I need something to like keep me involved and keep me invigorated. So I try to take how I think about music and give that to everybody that follows me on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, just doing something different, but also constantly being myself. Yeah, that kind of ties into a lot of this, but a different way to get your music heard is like sending it out to different blogs or sending it to friends or producers, or even when I was in an earlier state, I would email agents and other people, which I realize now is probably not the best idea. Like an agent deals with the shows and deals with getting everything set up on the show side of things. So me sending my music to an agent is probably kind of just spam email to them. And I didn't realize that until, a couple of years ago when I actually did get an agent, but I would constantly send music out to those type of people. And I realized that's probably not the best way to do it. But sending it out to blogs, sending it out to other friends, building a community of friends that are, whether they're bigger than you, smaller than you, just people that you can relate with that also produce, to get as much support or, even advice from other people. And on top of that, sending it to blogs also really helps, because I remember sending my music to blogs constantly and never getting a reply back. And you can follow up. Maybe they don't reply back to that song, but if you get 99.9% no's and you get 0.0 or 0.01% yes, it's the 0.01% that actually matters. Because if somebody eventually starts listening to it, you could send it out to 100, 1,000, 10,000. You could send however many emails it is or that it takes. But once one person comes back to you and either gives you feedback, like maybe they don't support you on the blog, but maybe they say, yeah, this isn't for us this time, but keep sending us your next stuff. At least you're getting a response from somebody that knows the name now, or at least they understand, like, oh, they're really persistent about it. Maybe I didn't like this release, but keep sending us more, because maybe we'll post it at some day or a later date, or a different song or a different EP or a different remix or whatever you're doing. Eventually somebody will answer, and it'll just give you a little bit of, there's a word for it, give you a little bit of ambition to keep going, I guess, or a little bit more, like fuel your drive a little bit. I ended up having a really, really big remix for Alice in Wonderland for her track called You Don't Know, that was just a bootleg that literally only had 21 tracks in it, and 2 of those tracks were the original song. I really didn't do all that much other than the drop and added a couple brass sounds here and there. But as she grew in Australia and in the US and then eventually the world, I was able to grow with that song and with her growth. So remixing songs is a great way to get. Obviously, the originals also help you a lot, because you need to have some, or I believe you need to have some standalone content to prove yourself, either as a songwriter or as like a whatever genre you're producing, just showing like, this is me, this is all me, or this is me, with a friend of mine, and this is what we came up with, instead of like, oh, it's just a remix. But when I was coming up, remixes were so helpful. Like I did a remix for Meek Mill, and that was supposed to be official, but it was a month before the big Meek Mill Drake beef had happened, so that fell off the table. But all of these remixes just kind of helped branch out, and on top of that, helping with the charts that I was talking about earlier, it was so easy for people to be like, oh, like Drake and Meek Mill, the new big song that we like listening to, but there's an electronic remix of it, let me listen to that. And then they show their friends, or people keep listening to it, and it blows up a lot faster than, hey, have you heard this random kid named Vincent? Like, here's one of his songs, I'm really about it. And they're like, well, what's the catch? There's nothing for them to tie into that and be like, oh, well, I'll keep to this, unless they go through and they love your original music and they go back through back catalog and love that stuff as well. But the remixes are what I believe catches people's eyes and ears a lot faster, especially at an earlier stage than just original music. Creating a brand kind of ties back into the way that I use social media, or I try to use social media and just be honest with people, where your brand kind of encompasses everything about you. It's not just the music you make, but it's the persona that you live, whether it's you or whether you create a persona out of yourself. The way that you carry yourself at a show, whether you're talking to people, whether you're like kind of hidden and you have a mask on, it can just kind of tie into everything. But trying to hone in who you are and what you want to portray will really help solidify everything together, especially with art direction too. That's why I put the artwork for my EP up there, because once I figured that out, like I have a rose tattoo fairly similar to that one, and I definitely want to get more tattoos, but I feel like that's the type of art that I would, hang in my house or like have a bunch of tattoos of. So I can look at that and say like, yeah, that's me. And I feel like maybe the music it can relate to it, maybe the music can't relate to it, but in my eyes, I think everything just ties together between the visual aspect and myself, the way that I carry myself. And all of those things together make up your brand. And that's, I believe, why people get excited or get interested in following you, even before the music. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not going over on time here, because I just talk too much. The process of creating an EP was kind of interesting. My managers had set up a boot camp worth of sessions, so it was somebody new that I'd never met coming to my apartment, meeting them for the first time, talking to them for an hour or two, getting to know them, writing music for 4 hours. They'd leave, I'd make food, go to sleep, and then do that every day for 3 weeks with new people every single time. People that I'd never met, people that sometimes I'd heard of, sometimes people I've wanted to work with. Majority of the time, I'd never heard of anybody that I was with. And they would just come over, we'd write a song, that would be it. Next day, same thing. Next day, same thing. 3 weeks of it, and eventually we had, 20-ish songs that needed to be tied down into however many we were going to work on. I ended up producing out the ones that I felt were the strongest or the ones that I had immediate ideas for. And then the man's actually here that helped us do this, but an A&R named Lauren Padman, who we call The Padman, helped come over to my apartment after I had written all of these songs, and they were majority done, like 80-90%, but he ended up putting the final touches on everything that helped glue everything together. The production was there, everything was ready to go, but there's something in giving music to other people and being vulnerable and say, I enjoy what I do, I love these songs, but help me make these better, tell me what you think, as opposed to saying, I know exactly what I'm doing, I'm the best, this is my music, leave me alone. So when Lauren came over, Lauren really took everything that I had as a base and created something even better out of it, just from his knowledge and wisdom from everything that he's done in his illustrious career. And then eventually, as we were going through, creating the art direction was just a mood board with any type of ideas that I could come up with. I had the tattoo idea in mind, although I see these as tattoos, but I also just see them as small little line drawings, which you could get tattooed, but for some reason, those really stuck with me. And eventually, I sent a bunch of designs to a guy named Cody, who ended up bringing it all to life. And what was really cool about it, too, is it wasn't exactly what I had sent him, but it was his style and his interpretation of what I had sent him. So even though at first glance it took me a minute to realize that, oh, this isn't exactly what I gave him, but he did it his own way, and kind of more of the story, just changing expectations or realizing that as an artist to another artist, maybe you got the idea of exactly what I was looking for, but you did it in your own way. And I thought that was way more special than, oh, I wanted it exactly like this, because you're letting another artist have a little bit of free range and do what they want on something. And I thought that was really, really special. But eventually all the songs came together, put it out, put a tour around it, and all of that, which sounds kind of, I've shortened that story pretty quick, but that took 5 months getting everything set up. It was a really, really long process, but I'm very thankful that we went through it and did it, because I think I grew quite a bit. Touring. The first line is kind of big. We did the first weekend of tour this weekend, and touring involves a lot of traveling, not a lot of sleeping, a lot of meeting people, a lot of setting up, a lot of preparation between sets, and it's kind of like fighting for sleep. The main thing that I think of is yeah, you have all these things to do, but I don't know when the next time I'm going to sleep is. On Thursday night before I flew, I was up at 3 a.m, at the airport by 6, on a plane by 8 to Seattle, got to Seattle, met the tour manager, got the light and all the other production stuff, hung out with friends until 7 or 8, we went and got food, and then go to the venue, set up at the venue, eat dinner, play the show. You're there till 2 or 3 at night, get back to the hotel, pack your bags. You still haven't slept yet since 3 a.m. on Thursday, technically Friday morning. Go to the airport fly from Seattle to Phoenix to Des Moines, which is in, oh man, thank you. I don't know any American geography. Ended up renting a car, still haven't slept in a bed yet, drive from, at like 5 o'clock when we land, drive from Des Moines all the way to Iowa City, get to Iowa City, check into the hotel, meet up with friends, eat, then go to the venue, play the show, and by 4 a.m. on Sunday, it was the first time that I had slept since technically Friday morning at 3 a.m. So when I say you're fighting for sleep, it's not really a joke. Like, you get sleep on planes if you're lucky, which I always sleep on the far right. I can actually get a decent amount of sleep. Like, I haven't slept since, I slept last night for 3 hours because I was stuck in Iowa City, but I got back at 1 o'clock this afternoon, got a bunch of stuff ready to set up for next week of tour, and, I'll sleep tonight, and that's, the next cycle. But tonight's like the first night since Sunday, and before that since Thursday night, that I'll be like sleeping in a bed for a solid more than 5 hours. So it's great. From the outside, all the pictures that we post, all the things that we're talking about, and like being around, and like, oh, it's so cool, like we're doing a show, like all the people that are excited about the show, but we're always fighting for sleep. It's a constant battle between like setting up a different set for a different city because all your sets are going to be different, or at least mine try to be, because different areas of the world listen to different music. So the set that works in Los Angeles the best, in my opinion, will not work as well as it will in New York, won't work the same as it does in New Orleans, doesn't work the same as it did in Iowa City. So it's just like constantly changing, constantly moving, and you're never sleeping. Same thing, or like tying in with the crowd stuff and changing the sets, it's really great as you do more and more shows to learn to read the crowd and understand what they listen to and what they like. As you play in a city more and more often, unless you already know or you have friends that live there, which is also great help. Like whenever I go to a city, I'll either ask friends that are from there or the venue people or promoters or whoever I can meet before the show, saying, what do you guys like to listen to? Or what are popular songs here that I could try to add to my set that would make it a little bit more special? Like if I played Too Short in the Bay, which, again, I don't know anything much about Too Short, but if you play Too Short in the Bay, it goes off. And I've seen that happen, so it's like, okay, let's dive into Too Short now on the plane ride back and figure out why it's so popular there and why it works. And instead of being a fake fan, understand it, instead of just like, oh, somebody told you that it works, so play it. Developing the show to go deeper than just another set is also very important. This is the first tour that we're bringing a lighting fixture that is something more than like, oh, I'm just going to pull up to the club with headphones and a USB, play a set, say bye, meet fans afterwards, and then walk off. And that can go into any depth that you want it to, really. It just kind of depends on how much money you want to put into it or what you're going to do to make it special. Like you can somehow, even as I'm saying this, I'm realizing, man, I should probably think about this. But even if it's not involving more money, maybe there's a way to take a brand or your brand and somehow add it to the show. Whether it's like something you say on the mic in a portion, or for me, I love, like in Seattle, I was walking up and down the line at like, 9, 10, 11 o'clock before I went on at 12:30, just talking to people, taking pictures, just meeting everybody that was there, because that's what I love to do. I love talking to people and seeing what you guys think, because I sit in my apartment when I'm not touring 24 hours a day. I make food, I play video games, I make more music, I talk to some people, but I'm just always there. And especially like frat shows too, like I love talking to the college kids, because then I get to find out what the next generation is listening to, because it's really cool. Like I feel like I'm an old head even though I'm 23, but I'm kind of set in my ways on the music I listen to, the music I play out. But if somebody in between talking to them, whether it's in line, whether it's at an after party, whether it's anywhere, it could be at an airport if somebody runs up to me, you guys might be able to give me some insight on, oh, maybe what you're doing is great, but we like this type of music. So it gives me a little bit of insight to what other people listen to. Because at the end of the day, those kids are the ones that are going to grow up a little bit more out of college and buy tickets to shows, or that are going to continuously get into electronic music. Maybe they're upcoming producers as well that want to send you demos, and then I give them my email. I love hearing what people have to say or what people are doing to keep myself involved, but also keep myself in the loop just as much as wanting to help other people. Another big thing, like it was really easy when I was doing shows in Canada, but learning when to get into shows and whether it's too early, whether it's too late. Like I wouldn't launch, if you guys, show of hands for anybody that remembers XVII. Okay, but I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but I'm glad that you guys do know. I would never have done a headline tour as XVII, even though there were a lot of stats. There was, we had a bunch of remixes that were doing really, really well before I switched over to Vincent. But that probably wasn't the right time to dive into like a solo headline tour. Like I've been producing since I was 13 or 14, and this year is the first year that we're doing like my own solo headline tour as like a full run, and that's a full decade. If you look at it, it's probably like 8 or 9 years. I don't think it's a full decade yet, or at least I hope it isn't. But it takes a long time to feel like you're confident enough to do that type of thing. And I think it's really easy to get into shows with friends, or if you're able to play like a constant party like Space Yacht or Brownies or something of that nature, or smaller, or even smaller than that, just being able to understand when the right time for shows is. There's a lot of people as well that will get a giant following really, really quick and then wait for shows instead of, jumping into it being like, here's a giant headline tour that I'm going to go off of right away. Like, I believe, if I followed it correctly, similar to what 1788L did, where they kind of waited for a show. Like the hype was there, everybody wanted a show, but they were letting the anticipation build for the right moment. And that's one way to go about it. You could do it 100 different ways. You could start getting into shows and playing smaller ones. You could have the same type of growth that he did and then just wait for a show until like the very peak moment where people would start losing interest. There's just a bunch of different ways that you can get into it, but I've personally, from my experience, I felt like it was a lot better to keep producing more before just jumping into a show and thinking that that was the best option because I was eager to do one. This is actually the part I'm most excited about because I feel like all of those things are really, really cool, and I can try to give you guys as much knowledge as possible, but I think these are just ideologies and, ways and words to live by, at least in my mind. You guys don't have to listen to what I say either, so if you guys don't agree with it, then that's fine. But I try to live by these things. If you're passionate and you have drive, everything will fall into place. That's like the biggest one for me. I immigrated to the US. I now live in the US. I have a visa to live in the US. Like, I work exactly what I wanted to as a kid. I ended up, my parents said it was either you pay rent and you can do whatever you want, but you have to pay rent when you turn 18, or you go to university and you don't have to pay rent. So I ended up, Canadian university is a lot cheaper than American university or college. So I ended up quite literally buying time by going to school, paying for school myself, just to be able to live at home rent-free, to be able to continue to produce. And I did that for 2.5 years before I said, like, no, this wasn't for me. At the same time as working 4 jobs, because I'd worked everywhere at that point. I used to play piano in a church. I used to work at a Safeway or Pavilions, if you guys know what Pavilions is here. I used to work at a Subway. I used to work at an A&W. We kind of did it all just to make sure that money was fine to pay for school and not even pay for like plugins or anything else. It was just to buy time to keep working. So if any of that can resonate, I hope it does, because like you can really do whatever you want if you have the passion, drive, and a little bit of patience. I love saying ditch the ego, because none of us have time for that. Like, you don't want to walk somewhere where somebody just thinks that they're better than you. Like, who has time to talk to somebody like that? Even if they are the biggest artist on the planet and you look up to them, that's just going to ruin how you think of them. So I try to, or very unhumble to say this, but I try to not keep an ego. I just try to tell everybody I'm a normal person, and it's not because I want to put on a face or a persona for you guys. I'm just actually a normal person. I just sit in my room and produce. Like, I feel like if you guys are producers, most of you do, and you show music to other people, but I just try to stay normal, and because there's nothing different about me. I literally just make music the same way some of you or the majority of you do. Your team is your family. Find people who believe in you as much as you believe in them. I went through 3 other teams over the course of 4 years and a separate agency as well before I'm now like settled with people that I believe are my family and that believe in the project just as much as I do. And for better or for worse, there were a lot of things that management companies and people that I was working with didn't mesh well. And then I started to realize after the first couple that, maybe it's also me because I'm not doing as much work as I should be doing, or I'm not as driven as I used to be. And there are a lot of, weird things that had happened with it. But the team that I have now, I've never felt so confident, not just in the project, but in the people that I work with, that regardless of what happens, they're all going to grow to do major things in their lives just because they remind me a lot of myself when I was younger and learning all this stuff. They're just so driven and passionate about what they do that to me it just feels like I'm home with these people. And on top of that, like, we can go out and get dinner and nobody's really talking about like, oh, like, what's the next project? Like, what are you guys doing for work? Like, we just sit down and eat as a family. Like, we learn about each other's lives. We learn about everything else that's going on. And to the other managers, like, I had managers that had plaques from working at major record labels and stuff like that. And eventually when I signed with them, I thought that was the ticket. Like, that's it. They've done so much that it's impossible for me to fail, even though, I could do something that wouldn't work. But I realized afterwards that it's not about the accolades and what they've done for other people. It's what those people can do and work with yourself. A big thing is not comparing yourself to other people around you. I really only use social media unless I'm like bored at the airport. Now I realize I do scroll through Twitter and Instagram for an hour or two if I've got nothing else to do. But the majority of the time when I'm home and I can work, the only time I go on is to post. So I've tried to do that half from, not wanting to be stuck on social media all the time, but at the same time it also helps me not worry about what other friends are not in a bad way either. It's like I want to know what other people are accomplishing, but I don't want to relate that to myself and my accomplishments and say, oh, well, somebody else got 10,000 plays on a song. Like, why can't I do that? Because I feel like that's just negative energy to put to yourself. And instead of wasting your time being upset that somebody else is succeeding, why not better yourself and do something for yourself instead of, getting mad at friends doing stuff? Which I also used to be like that. I used to get really mad when I saw people succeeding. And if you guys know Cray, Cheney set me real straight, told me, like, you can't do that. That's just whack. Don't do that. And so eventually I learned not to do that. Eventually, like, the last 2 things are pretty self-explanatory. And I'm saying that because I'm kind of running out of time here because I talk too much. But you're going to get lucky a lot of the time, and you're going to catch a ton of bad breaks, and those are going to suck. But you just have to keep pushing. Like, once you don't want to give up at the first sign of anything negative happening, because eventually, like, we could have given up at any point. I could have given up when, the first management team didn't work out and we moved on. I could have given up a second time, third time, fourth time, which I just wouldn't let happen. Like, I'm not just going to let the dream die because, a show offer fell through, or a remix didn't get a blog post, or the song that I just didn't move as much as I wanted it to. Like, you got to have enough drive and passion in yourself to look past that and say, I love what I do. I'm just going to keep doing this until it's not feasible. Like, even if I had to go back to Canada, get a day job, I would still do music as a hobby. I would probably put it online too, and maybe not even to create another alias and, reach a different level, but just to do it because I love music that much. It doesn't really, like, of course, playing shows for people is great, getting followers and, like, growing a fan base is fantastic, but I genuinely just love making music. Like, if there's an idea in my head, I'll wake up at 3 a.m, look at my computer that I turned off an hour before and say, well, I should probably turn it back on, otherwise I'm gonna forget this idea. Like, I really love it that much. So if you guys love it that much, and you have like a couple of bad breaks, just know that you're gonna get just as many good breaks to come. Maybe they'll take a month, a year, 2 years, 5 years down the line, but it will always come. And going back to immigrating as my last point, I guess, is risk is terrifying, but the leap of faith. What? Yeah, I know. They're telling me I don't have time. I'm gonna say this last thing. Just, you wanna have, like, I immigrated off of nothing. I had like $1,000 in my bank account. I had a friend that was gonna let me live with her, and that was it. And a pair of Coachella tickets. And that was what made me quit my job. Literally, I quit all my jobs for a pair of VIP Coachella tickets. 2 weeks later, I moved and immigrated, and that was it. So eventually, if you're able to take a leap of faith, you just got to do it. Maybe it's not the best idea, but the only thing that I would live by, and even my dad agreed with me at 19, which I felt like he would never do, but the thing that bothered me the most is I would much rather go in and try to do something and see if it works out than 10 years later, not have done it and always wondered what if. Like that was really what pushed me to do it. But that's the main portion of this, but let's dive into the DAW. I'm gonna run through, thank you guys. Okay, so I'm gonna have to run through this pretty quick because I talk too much. Okay, let's go into this one. Okay, to save a little bit of time, and kind of from my own personal knowledge, how many of you guys have listened to the EP? Oh, wow, that's a lot, okay. How many of you guys know Breathe 2.0? Yeah, okay, sick. I'm gonna load the production project. Now I'm kind of going free range and I'm like not super nervous to talk about anything, but the project that's running right now is a mix master project because this song was put out before a friend of Lauren's started mixing and mastering our stuff, who's also a genius and knows way more than I do. But the mix master project is basically just condensed stems from the production project, sounds that would mesh together like hi-hats. Sorry, I keep my kicks and my snares separate, and a lot of the instruments that are, the pads, I'll put them together. Sometimes they need to be separate. The guitars I'll put separate. Extra drum percussion I'll put separate. And I just kind of condense those stems in once they come from this project. And it's pretty much solely because I can't stand to look through 147 tracks and actually think straight. And I just can't hear it. Like it blends too much in my head. And after you've been working on a project for hours, to me, it becomes way too confusing to get used to. So when I bounce it out, it just becomes a lot cleaner for me to be able to see each part, and then I can go through systematically and add everything back. Like I'll start with how loud I want my kick to be, match it to my snare, and those are kind of, for me, those are the loudest things in the track because those are your big drums to push through. And, after that, add everything back in. Like I added, thinking about it in my head, I probably added the sub afterwards because the sub needs to be pretty loud, then the synths in the drop to match, to make sure that the sub and the kick and the snare and the synths weren't all fighting. And then after that, adding everything else back in to make sure that the track feels similar volume all the way through. And then from there, just going and EQing everything to the way that I would like it. Like that, I can run through it very, very quickly on the other project, but there isn't all that much done with it. It's just kind of like a couple of EQs to bring out the highs because my ears hate highs when I'm producing, so I don't bring them down, but I just kind of leave them where they're at, and then realize later on that there's no high end and it sounds like I'm listening to it and with another pair of headphones on beforehand. So the reason I asked if you guys had heard the song is so I don't have to play it all the way through because, again, I'm talking way too much. So I'm just going to run through the track as much as I can here to see and show you guys what's going on. This is, the main thing, okay, how many people use Ableton? Okay, that makes my life so much easier. I apologize for everybody that doesn't use Ableton. All the other programs are fantastic, and one thing that I didn't mention is you just need to use whatever you can get all the ideas into as quick as you can before losing the inspiration. I think that's the biggest thing. But basically, everything in this giant group, which goes from, there's 57 tracks in one group, they are all run through an LFO tool. So I get my sidechain on everything that's in here, which are all the synths, everything minus the vocal. The drop is in here. As much as I can fit in here is here, because I like my sidechain to be really thick and cut deep. And it's very, very deep. Like this line is just insane. I don't really know is there something that you guys want to hear specifically? I'm just going to run through as much as I can, but there's quite a few things to go through. Start of the first drop? Yeah, sure. Oh, do you want me to play everything through there? Yeah? Okay, see, this is great. Thank you guys for talking. Oh, what the? Sorry, my computer hates me. Yeah, my CPU hates me. Okay, maybe we'll try this again. There's got to be a setting to change it if it doesn't work. See? Okay, another thing I was going to say is you guys probably know a lot more about this than I do. I learned from YouTube tutorials, so I kind of have no idea. But the buffer size here, right? Yeah, you guys are laughing. I don't know what you're laughing at because I don't know what this is. Oh, over here. Go back to 100? Thanks, Morgan. Yeah, my computer hates me. I'll just go track by track then, because hopefully that'll work a lot better. I apologize, guys. This is kind of just like the low end bass. It's like a regular patch. Like if you run an init patch, this is the first sound that you get. Turned up to 16 unison, threw a sub under for some reason, not sure why. Cut everything down so it's just kind of like a low sound like this. Literally no effects on it. Just an EQ and made a little bit more mono. Man, this is gonna bother me. I'm so sorry, guys. This is the vocal for the drop, and it's run through, obviously I made it louder, compressed it so that it maintains the same volume, cut out a couple things over here, and really what actually does it is the OTT and the saturator. I just distorted the hell out of it and threw a little bit of reverb. The reverb is kind of cool because it's run at like halfway, but it's a very short decay, so it just kind of fills up the sound a little bit instead of it just being one tiny, like static, distorted sound. So if I played without it, with the reverb, it doesn't sound as bad. You turn this down a little bit. Just kind of like masks the saturation from the distortion and makes it a little easier on the ears, as you guys can tell, because before it was kind of rough. There's a lot of distorted guitar through the drop as well. All of this, again, is run on this white group, which is sidechaining the entire thing, run through an amp. And one of the main things, going back up here, I believe it's in the Valhalla room, is all this automation, which kind of just makes the drop. So in these little spaces, if I put the drop synths all together, this automation is just with the mix, and so it changes how much the Valhalla room is being used, and I threw it on the entire group so that it feels more glued together and it feels like one moving piece as opposed to like, oh, we just stacked a bunch of synths on top of each other and did them individually. So like with it, like this sounds a lot choppier and there's space. Like if I put it back on over here, like that giant tail is created by the reverb through the entire group, even the bass. So it just kind of fills out everything a lot more than you would get from not using it. All of these were resampled Serum sounds, I believe. Oh, that's not what I want. So as far as I believe, because I know I made this sound, it is just the same bass preset that I had used before, like that small, like Reese type bass for the intro. And then instead of having the filter cut off halfway, I opened it all the way up, and eventually just took notes, like single notes that were running the bass line for the root notes of each chord, and then chopped them up individually to give it that pulsing feeling the same way that the rest of the synths have. Like even with these synths, which I'll show you how I made because it's probably one of the more important parts, it's all of these giant sustains, like they're one hits through reverb that are recorded in audio and then chopped up in different parts so that it sounds like it's modulating and moving through different parts of the sound instead of just being like one brick wall. But really it's just a giant reverb tail cut up into different parts and then compressed. I believe it's over here. Yeah, just these giant tails for no reason. Okay, not that. How do you? There. Okay. I don't know why. Well, earlier these had a bunch of reverb on them because I went through the project to make sure that everything was good. Apparently everything is not good. But even if I threw them on right now, oh, wait, here it is, yeah. Yeah. So basically these are just one hits that have a load of reverb on them. And then they were recorded in a one audio, separate from, like the high ones were done separate from the bass notes, which were separate from the sub, and eventually just chopped up in audio that created this stuff over here. So I'll play this one more time. And right now the LFO is running, so beforehand they were just straight stabs. God, this is painful. I apologize, guys. But just those recorded in audio and then chopped up in different parts. Like you can kind of tell by the waveform from these other parts up here that like this sound is a separate part of the tail from here. Like this is when the tail had just started. This is further down when it's just kind of all reverb sound mushed up together and just kind of edited and chopped around until it sounded decent, which is all just kind of up to how you hear the song. The sub is just one note. And then there was a bass part, which, like I said before, was the big growly Reese-ish type bass. I call it Reese because there is an actual definition for Reese bass, and I don't know what it is. I just keep calling it a Reese bass, probably misnaming it. Maybe it is a Reese bass, you guys can correct me. But whatever it is, it's just the same one that I'd played over here. 16 unison, and then a lot of cutoff. Let's see. So after I recorded those, I put everything together, ended up editing the drop. Everything is sidechained to a ghost kick and ghost snare, which is a, oh my lord, it's down here. So every time, what happens is every time one of these MIDI notes trigger, it triggers the LFO tool, and I put the LFO tool on the group. So every time anything in the group, or anytime one of these MIDI notes hits, it hits the LFO and ducks everything. But if you do it with an entire group, it gives, I personally think, and at least I do that with majority of my tracks, it gives the drums so much room to push through. You won't get a lot of fighting with the sub of your kick, or like the low end of your kick, and an actual sub that's running, and they won't punch for volume because you're cutting everything completely, so it has room to breathe. And I think for me, it gives a lot of groove to the music itself, just having this stuff cut through everything completely. Okay, go to like kick in the snare. It's pretty simple. I think it's pretty simple. It might not be simple. I don't know. So just like a drum bus on a, let's see what kick is this. Just a drum bus on a thick kick. Literally called thick with 2 C's. There's like a remedy snare. You guys are laughing. That's the name of it. I don't know what to tell you. This remedy snare, I use these fades a lot because I think that you can get a lot of those really annoying pops from some samples. Again, I don't know why this is called this, but this clap is actually phenomenal. If you want to hear this clap, it's so good, but it has the worst name ever. Is it here? No. It's on. So I think one of the reasons that we're recording this as well, so my computer can't handle it, but I also don't produce on my MacBook. I just use it for like emails and record box and stuff when I'm on the road. Like I have a PC at home that I do all my production stuff on. But, okay. And this other annoying thing with the beta is whenever you solo something, it kind of, you have to specifically click each one and unsolo them. It's a great clap. I love that clap. But that connected with this. Okay, that's not the command. This is like a young chop snare, almost, that Minesweeper did, that I also love his stuff. His stuff's amazing. And this is a remedy snare with the tail cut, or with the attack cut off, so it just kind of gives the tail, which I think sounds great. It's not very strong, but I use a lot of seemingly chop snares in all my songs. Another big part, once we get there and find it, is probably all the guitar. Wait, I'm probably gonna unsolo everything. I did, thank God. This is just all the guitar together. I just recorded this with my guitar with an input. Nothing is really done to it. Okay, I say that, there's quite a bit of stuff done to it. I mean, it doesn't sound like it, I guess. I'm just lying to you guys, I apologize. So there's nothing on the group. This is isotope vinyl, this is free, but I throw a little bit of warp depth on because it gives it like this, it like pitches it around a lot. It makes it sound old. Like if I throw this on more. Here how it's bending in pitch a lot, it kind of gives it like a sound. But if you do just a tiny bit of it, which I think I only did 4%, kind of like gives it like an old nostalgic feeling for some reason. And as far as I know, I believe vinyl's free. So it's a really great plugin to dive into. There's a lot more that you can do with it. Cut a little bit of the low end out because I record too close to my computer and there's feedback from how I plug it in. And that should show how little I know about anything. Isotope for EQ. Open it up. Yep, just an EQ. Probably another EQ. Yep, just another EQ. I EQ stuff a lot, even just over EQ it. Ozone? Like as opposed to like an EQ8? Yeah, it's kind of really weird, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, and you guys all agree, so I'm just kind of weird. I think the EQ8's really great for like the 4 times cutoff, and I can get like majority of the low end cut out really, really quick through that. A lot of friends are like, oh, EQ8 can't cut out all that, but if you 4 times it fairly far up, like in the, I mean, depending on the sound, like for sub, I'll cut it at like 20 hertz or 25 if it's like a, I mean, whatever note that is. I don't know the math on it or what hertz is what note. But for the EQ8, it's just like really simple to cut it quick. With the EQ in Isotope, you can, again, don't know the command on this, but on the computer back or the PC, you can hit Alt and either right click or left click, and it gives you like a cone that you can change sizes to just hear certain frequencies. So from that, I kind of use that as a like a pinpoint model to find the sound, but for like the EQ8, it's just kind of like, oh, I need to cut this real quick, just throw it on. And it takes less CPU, which you can kind of see as a little bit of an issue right now. Okay. So the guitar is just like all, they're just like individual lines. I had to pick up learning how to play guitar, and I don't really know how to do it, but I know what note sounds right, and it takes like 5 or 6 tries to get a single line through. And then obviously as it's playing and looping, I just kind of freestyle over it until I find other notes that sound good. And this was the 3rd track that I ever recorded with guitar. So there's a whole bunch of different just a huge EQ cut on this. And this is where Evelyn's vocal comes in. God, that's so painful. Again, I apologize, guys. The vocal, there wasn't, okay, I was about to say there wasn't really anything done, but I haven't looked, so there might have been a bunch of stuff done. Just another compressor. I just brought it up again because it wasn't loud enough. This is automated for the drop sound, the redux, so that it gives it that really big crush sound. I'll play it right before so that you guys can hear it. It's just like crushed up, so it gives it a little bit of drive. So I try to run. My manager said I only have 2 minutes left, so I'm trying to think of everything I can run through really, really quick. The drums and the builds are pretty simple. I throw a lot of crowd noise in, just like simple claps, just to kind of fill space. Because if you have like a clap just sitting there, like it sounds pretty empty. But when you put the two together, okay, when you put the two together, there we go. With another snare build. It just gives it more space instead of it just being like simple build-ups and like one sound samples or one-shot samples. There's a clock. I love clocks. It just makes everything sound good. As soon as Zed started using clocks, I started using clocks. Zed's a clock, I'm a clock. It's fantastic. I got to find a different way to manipulate it so it doesn't sound like a clock, which I've started doing, just any type of way that I can get that type of sound without it being that sound. The vocals. This was all the ad-libs that I had to choose from the original Breathe, and just different takes from Evelyn and or Mr. Blonde. And she created like tons of ad-libs, which I ended up chopping up in the first Breathe to create that, the main vocal chop that goes through. But it was kind of, since I'd made it before, it was just like plug and play, just throw it in and chop it up a little bit. This is the Illustrious Effects group. One of my favorite things to use ever are these like little reverse impact shots. That's it. It's literally just like a low end noise that, but in context, it like drives the kick. Like it's like a lead in for the kick and just kind of lets it flow instead of like, oh, you're hearing these different things. There's a snap or a clap and then immediately the kick just punches you in the face out of nowhere. Like I mean, which you can still do. It's just this gives it a little bit of like a lead in along with the white noise that's over here. A bunch of different risers. Really EDM. Really EDM. And then more of these lead-ins. I try to use these lead-ins every time like a 4-bar, 8-bar cadence is done. It just kind of helps tie it all together. These are smaller risers as well. This entire group is pretty much the exact same thing. Like this impact, or these things lead into kicks or claps, like the low end sweep, and they also help bring these impacts in. So that big punch bass fall is this impact. and it helps bring those in. Lots of little uprisers, lifters on that side. This is the intro hat group for like the main part, and there's just a lot of just compressed, a little bit of EQ. Nothing really done to these hats, a little bit of frequency shifter, just to like change the sound of it itself. This delay that Morgan and Fletcher actually showed me, called the Haas effect, that I like religiously use now. Basically, if you have, as far as I understand it, because I don't understand much, if you have the left side at 1 millisecond, you have the other side at 8 milliseconds, it pans everything as far left and as far right as it goes, like literally as far right and as far left as it goes. And then, you know, with utilities like I used here, you can kind of bring it back to sort of center, but it doesn't, you can push it as far wide as you want, you can push it as narrow as you need it, you can literally slam it to the walls, then bring it back to mono for no reason, and you literally canceled out what you did, but it might sound cool. But it helps a lot with giving space in my mix master. A constant ride cymbal on every beat to kind of give it flow. This is probably this cymbal reverbed, then recorded, then reversed. Yep. That's the effects channel because I forgot to unsolo it. Again, the oddly named snare. I swear to you, that's what it was named. The kick build, same kick as the drop, kick snare group. And then the last thing, I think that's all I'll be able to show you guys is, oh my lord, I have to. I love the beta for Ableton a lot. I don't know why I keep using it, but there's literally no way to unsolo these things. I know. What? I know. There's one, literally this, and I'm done, I promise. It's like the other, like the last thing of the song that I haven't shown. I just have to make sure that nothing is soloed. Okay. These are arcade sounds, and if this doesn't work, I'm gonna scream. Okay, well, I'm not gonna scream, but they're not here. These are, because I'm not connected to the internet or something, but these arcade sounds, it's a plugin called Arcade by Output, and like you pay $9 a month, kind of like a Dropbox subscription or something, or a Splice subscription, and they're these like one-shots, but they're like looped pads that you can get. And if I could show you guys, I would. Maybe I'll put up a tweet or something afterwards. So yeah, yeah, this is soloed. This is soloed. Yeah, because it's probably not connected to the internet. But okay, well, at least I can show you guys what it is if you guys have Arcade or use Arcade. It's the pack called Acoustic Textures. And all of these come, like each MIDI note for a full 2 scales comes with a separate loop that if you just hold it, it keeps looping. You can change all these different effects on it. Like there's shape that kind of like morphs it a little bit. Back is some sort of distortion, delays, obviously it delaying, and it kind of pairs up. And then air is just like this white noise that's added. But each of these are changed as you go through different versions. Like there's particles, and that's a whole library that has 30, 40 separate presets. And by presets, I mean like another set. Every preset has like a set of 14, 15 sounds that you can run through. And each of like particles itself as a bank has like 40 different presets to run through before you have a separate 20 versions of each thing that you go into. And then there's tons of different banks that are constantly updated. I'll show you guys the other one too. And then it's not gonna work, but at least you guys will get to see it. It's probably the same thing. Yeah, it's just 2 separate notes from the same pack. And I really apologize that I can't show you guys. I'm gonna have to go home and do another, just like record this again and make sure that I can get some of these sounds for you guys or tweet it. But
Rob, let's move to Q&A.
Yes, thank you.
Yo, give it up for Rob, guys. Got a whole bunch of extra time. Okay, so we're running a little bit behind, which is totally fine. So we're just gonna do 15 minutes of Q&A. So I'm gonna try to prioritize like production related questions, and there's a meet and greet afterwards. So if your question like doesn't get asked, you'll still have a chance after.
Yeah,
so.
I'll be around.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, you're good, man.
Sorry.
It's okay. All right, yeah, so just raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. And just hold the mic close to your face so that the audio picks it up.
Thanks for showing us all this stuff. Can you go into like a synth or a bass sound that you've done with Serum and show us like really quickly from Serum, but also like the compression, the EQ, like what is going through your mind, the decision-making process when you say, I want another EQ or I want another compression, I want the attack at this or the release at this, like that change.
Like how does that come about?
Yeah, like how do you,
those things?
Yeah, can you like walk us through like one of them?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I think a lot of it is just hearing it. Like I'm like, oh, well, this sound could use that. And after I do that, I'm like, oh, well, this sound could use one of those. And then it's like, well, that sounds great, but what else can we do to make this sound cool? And then you throw one of those on. And I say those because I don't really know what I threw on. But I'm trying to, oh, yikes. And it's probably going to solo something else too. I'll try to go through the actual, how it was created, if I could ever find it. This project is a giant mess. Okay, synth group. Is there anything in there? Yeah, okay, so oh, you know what? No, that's not going to work because I won't be able to look at it. So this is just a really high and wide synth, I think. Oh, my Lord. Oh, okay, not that. Why is none of this playing? I apologize, guys. This is ludicrous. I don't know why this is not working. Yeah, like even without the group, we're getting audio, but it's not shoving through. I'm the idiot. I don't know. So like this is just for whatever reason 15 unison. I don't know why. There's no filter on it for some reason. There's a little bit of hyper dimension or hyper and dimension. There's actually a lot of hyper and dimension. And then I threw the multiband on because for whatever, I again don't understand it, but it gives it a lot of high end and a lot of punch. So it just kind of sounded better with it. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. Whenever my computer stops hating me, I can show you another one. I believe this is probably the exact same thing. Down an octave. I don't think these ones matter. The bass one is kind of cool. And it's the exact same bass as the first one that I made, but this one has a lot of the filters up. And then the same type of compressor, just kind of changed the threshold and the ratio to give it a little bit more punch and boosted the lows and a bit of the overtones of where I thought it sounded good. Cool. Just to kind of get that gritty sound. Like, last thing to just close that off for you, a lot of the times I'll make like a high-end version of a synth to get all the highs out and have it fit. Then there would be like a mid-section that are kind of like either squares or sines. Shout out Jaren. The squares are great and kind of give it, like the sines are really strong, but the squares give it this like punch and grunge that you can't get out of sines, at least unless you distort them. Then there's the low end, I'm gonna call it a Reese, even though it might not be a Reese. You guys can correct me in the Q&A or whatever. And that gives it, I cut out all the low from that, so it gives it a lot of grit through the low end, and then I'll throw a sub underneath that. So it's kind of like a 4-part sandwich. if that makes sense and or answers your question.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Perfect.
Someone just raised.
Can you go a bit into like how you organize your sample library and like what if like
What organization?
do you organize your sample library at all?
No, I mean,
You just have like a bunch of packs together like in one folder.
yeah, here you go. That's kind of, we've got a bunch of packs here. Again, this is not my production computer, and I think I realized a lot of the glitchiness. It was running fine earlier when we played it, because I know we tested it before, but it's because we're screen recording it, and my CPU can't handle doing both. But I kind of just, like, even when I'm searching for samples through here, like I'll search through here, or I'll go on Splice, and I'll find something that sounds cool, and eventually, as I keep finding more, I'll throw them into like one of these color-coded things that is either on the beta or on Ableton 10 itself. But I don't think this was part of your question at all, but I feel like I don't like doing it that much, because it's so easy for me to just be like, oh, here's your drum samples, you use these all the time, just keep using them, and you're gonna end up with like, maybe not songs that sound similar, but vibes that sound similar through songs. And it's cool. Like, you can do that and you can build your own sound out of it. But lately I've just been trying to like go against that and start using different drums that maybe I haven't heard before. Maybe there is a sound that I'm looking for, and I'll either relay it to Splice, or I'll find one of my samples through, or not mine, but I'll find one of the samples that I have through any of these packs or any of the packs that I have at home, and then just hear a sound that I like, know what I have to do to it, whether it's like a drum bus for a kick or a little bit of distortion on a vocal, and then just do it myself. Does that answer the question a little bit?
Yeah, it does. I wasn't sure if you just had all your samples in like one folder, or if you like
Went through kicks of each
yeah,
one.
like
then
you have
put
like a
them
kick
in.
folder, and like, you know what I mean?
See, that would be really smart if I did that. So if you do that, you're like way ahead of me. But no, I just have everything as unorganized as possible.
You are definitely way more ahead of me. So
Oh, no, that's not true.
What's up, man? So
Yo.
what's the point of the compressor on the return track down there? Is that like a parallel processing kind of thing?
Be honest with you, I don't use it.
Oh,
I don't. Okay, this is the funniest thing for all you producers out there. I don't know anything about send and return tracks. I never use them. Someone's clapping. Maybe if that makes it more relatable. Like, I literally learned off of YouTube tutorials. I think that when somebody told me about doing it, and that's like my preset to when I make a new track, a new project, it always sits there. But somebody told me about parallel compression. I know you can send some stuff there. And whenever I send stuff there, it just makes it louder. And it really started bothering me. So I just said, screw that. I'm just going to keep doing what I know how to do and don't do it. So maybe after I've realized that I have to watch the Bohemian Rhapsody movie documentary tonight, but I think we'll now look at how to use send and return tracks, because I feel like those might be important.
let me ask you something better then. You have your kicks and snares on a bus. Do you process those things together in any specific way, or?
This is
Not at
good,
all.
because I think I might be able to open this one. That won't. Don't save. I don't think this project will freak out because it's just audio samples, but I probably did something to the kick and snare group together after I threw it all together in a mix master track.
Like some sort of like compression or something to
Yeah,
tame?
just like something simple, like nothing insane. Yeah, so they're in the same group. Oh, fantastic. I threw a fab filter that I have at home, but I don't have here. And it's just a little bit of compression. Quite an early attack. Again, couldn't tell you what it really does, but it sounds good. So I like it, and that's great. But I have like this drum bus on my UAD stuff as well that also works great. It's a API 2500. It sounds really cool, and it beefs everything up. So I throw that on the kick quite often. And apparently 2 fab filters that I don't really know how to use, but also sound cool. I apologize, guys. I don't really, maybe this is proof. I don't really know anything. I just kind of like dick around on this until it sounds cool. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. And then that's it. It's done.
Cool, man.
Did I
Thank
answer
you.
the question a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you know I know nothing.
I think a lot of us are in the same boat there.
Hey, thanks again for taking the time today. I had a quick question. So on Breed 2.0, when we were going through the main vocal, I remember us seeing that there wasn't a ton of like processing for that particular one, but you said later that you like to sometimes put like distortion on it or something. I was wondering if you like typically like what's kind of your like vocal processing chain in terms of like distortion or like de-essers and stuff like that.
So I made, again, probably don't have it here. Wait, yeah, look, I called it de-esser, woo, because it took forever to figure out how that was gonna work. Throwing that on here, it's just a regular Ableton. It cuts off a curve at 11.2 kilohertz, pretty narrow curve. And every time that it goes, it just kind of cuts through. So like if I threw one of those onto a vocal, I'd generally put and like slam a compressor after it to keep it all the same volume, because the peaks that this thing cuts out, especially on 100% dry wet, is pretty extreme. And let's see if I have it here too. Yeah. This is like the vocal rack that I normally use. The LFO tool that's on it is kind of just for groove. Normally I end up turning it off after I start using it, but for whatever reason, I had made this one earlier for a separate track and it just sounded great, so I saved it as a preset and keep using it. But this just cuts off all the side EQ from the EQ8, so it's more of a mono sound. OTT just to where I like it, because another thing that I don't understand and don't really use all that often unless it's in here because it sounds cool. And then we really, really, really saturate the heck out of this thing. The Valhalla room gives it, after the saturator, so it's not as gritty and as attacky of a sound, I just throw a little bit of Valhalla on it, partially also because I like the way that sounds. But I mean, if you weren't gonna put the Valhalla room on or any type of reverb after that, you could just throw the dry wet on this down a little bit, or maybe not saturate it as much, or maybe just EQ it so it wasn't as screechy. But I didn't like how much of attack it had without the Valhalla, so I just let it breathe a little bit more. That's another thing too, and goes probably to show how much or how little I know, is I just kind of throw reverb on things sometime to cover up my mistakes, and then let LFO tool clean it up for me eventually. And I wish I was lying, but I'm not. The LFO tool, this just goes every half beat to kind of give, at least in the song that I was working on that didn't end up coming out, it gave it a little bit of pulse every half beat to keep it moving. But lately, I watched a Lewis the Child production tutorial, and they used Decapacitator. I don't remember who that's by. SoundCloud, yeah, thank you. Oh my God, you guys actually know way more than I do. Yeah, it's phenomenal. They have like a punish button, and that actually cranks everything out. But that's really, really cool. And then again, Valhalla room, was it Bob Ross where he paints and he just like, yeah, you cover up your mistakes or whatever. Either that or it was This Hour is 22 Minutes skit. And if anybody knows whatever that show is, that's an old Canadian like Rick Mercer type thing. So maybe you guys won't know it. But does this answer the question a little bit on the vocal?
Yeah, definitely.
Like
Thank you.
this is the same chain that I threw on the lead vocal for that. Sick.
So do you find yourself starting with the drop more often, or like an intro? Versus intro?
Intro.
And why is that?
I could write a minute-long intro to drop and not get a drop for years. Like I could write 30 of those before I came up with one drop. I think the drop is just kind of like, especially if it has to match something, that's also where I get frustrated. Like it's kind of counterproductive. Sometimes I'll start with a drop and I'll normally be able to come up with an intro really, really quick. But there's also other times, at least recently, where I'll write one or the other and then get really frustrated from barely trying, like, maybe 30 minutes on the next thing, or like whether it's the drop or the intro, and then like give up, close it, and try again in a bit because I want it to match so bad, but it doesn't match for some reason. And I think the songs that do come out or do get finished producing is when I do figure it out. Like there's tons of demos, even from when we did the EP stuff, that will probably never ever come out just because they never got produced out to that point. But probably the majority of the reason that they never got finished was because I couldn't figure out one or the other to match together, or just couldn't come up with an idea that would do it. Like you could force yourself to do it, and like I know other producers, I'm sure some of you guys in the room can just like write out and bang out track after track after track pretty easy, but I'm the type of person that'll sit and not do anything for a week, or like maybe I'll like organize samples or come up with something, but then I'll come up with a track idea and I will work for 16 hours straight, sleep at 8 in the morning, wake up at noon, make food, go for another 8 hours, 10 hours, sleep whenever I feel like I'm too tired to keep working on it, and then go until it's done. But normally the intros are first, just because of like piano background and everything that I'd known through instruments before. It's so easy for me to just constantly layer as many things as possible on top of each other. And that's kind of what I try to do until it's like over, like it's too much. Like it just sounds like I've got too much in one song. And then from there, it's like, all right, now that we've thrown as much different types of melodies or harmonies in there that we can possibly imagine with pads or vocal samples or anything on top, let's portion it out and make a song out of it. Instead of just like, oh, let's just keep adding to a 16-bar loop forever and then being like, yeah, screw it, I don't like it. But yeah, intros come way easier than drops.
Thank you. All right, we're gonna do 2 more questions.
Hey, Vincent, thanks for doing this.
No, thank you for coming.
You mentioned earlier that you have an idea in your head, and then you want to get it on paper, essentially as fast as possible. So, what's your process like once you have an idea? What's the fastest way for you to get it on there? Like, do you have like templates that you use, some presets that you just open up and you're ready to go? What's your process?
I think for the majority of it, it's just like either being able to create a sound or be able to create like the drop sound really, really quick. I think that's like the big thing, because I have a lot of trouble writing drums and then writing a melody to the drums, because I feel like the drums will restrict what type of rhythms I can use through a synth or like a bass line or something like that. So a lot of the time when I say like, let's get it down as quick as you can, I can't get it out. And it's just like, okay, well, whatever, screw that, moving on to the next thing, or like just give up on it. But for the times where it does come out, it's like opening up Serum and playing around with it for, half hour to an hour or however long it takes till you find something that's cool. And then from there, develop not just the sound, but develop like automations on it, get the rhythm right. Once the rhythm's right, you can get the drums in. I'm specifically talking right now for drops, but once you get the rhythm in from the drums and you have like a little bit of a bass point to work from, then you can expand on everything else. You can go through like, or at least I would go through like percussion, through like, like a simple ride every beat, or hi-hats to give it a little bit more of a groove, or maybe the automation on the synth isn't, like it doesn't open enough, or you want to give it a little bit more movement through that, or through like a reverb to give it phrasing. Like there's a lot of other stuff that I try to do to get the sound moving if I start doing it quick, because once I start listening to stuff on loop, I just get bored with it and give up. It's just kind of how I work.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Awesome.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Always me after the question.
Hi.
Yeah.
So I noticed in the earlier projects when you're creating sections, you were bouncing out audio with reverb and compression on it, like audio that was already created, and you splice it, you would reverse it and put fades in order to chop and do different things. And I know it creates, I know when you bounce it out, it creates very strange, like you can't go back on certain types of processing. Do you ever feel that interferes with your mixing process, or is it like more important to get your idea out in any way you can and then worry about mixing later?
I think that's the main point, because like the reason that the production project for Breathe 2 had 140 whatever tracks is just what'll happen is like I'll create all the synths, and then eventually like I'll put all the effects on it, I'll record it, come out with the one audio sample or one sound, and then do a whole bunch of stuff to that. But let's say it didn't sound that great and there was a way to do it differently. I always try to leave in the production project the actual VSTs or the templates that created those sounds. So if it doesn't work and it sounds weird and I need to go back to it, I have something to revert to. Although it does kind of screw up the project itself the way that we all heard for a grueling 20 minutes, and I apologize again for that. The ideas and the presets are still there, or like whatever I've created is still there to be able to go back and redo it if I need to. Like there's a demo that I've given out to people that I haven't like mixed mastered yet, and there's a lot of different things that are wrong with it, and I need to go back and change it. But I did exactly what I did for the other project and recorded it in audio and then spliced it around. So now I'm going to have to go back, redo the same type of modulations through recording and do it a second time over, which is kind of a pain in the butt, but I know that even though it's meticulous, I really want it to sound as good as it can, so I'll go back and do it. But yeah, I mean, like, to actually get back to the question and stop going on a tangent, I would definitely go for getting the sound right first and worrying about mixing it into the project later, solely because I work off of inspiration. And if it doesn't sound great and it's bothering me, then I'm gonna like go back and worry about that before I even try anything else. And most times that like limits how far or how long I can keep working, because I'll just keep wasting time on something else and not get what I need done to keep my brain flowing.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
All right, let's have another round of applause for Rob.
No, thank you guys for coming out. And thank you to JBL for having me.
Thank you, man. That was amazing.